My name is Hannah Pierce. I'm 27 years old, and there's a sentence my mother said to me last winter that I'll never forget. Not because it was clever, not because it was true, but because it felt like she had taken a knife to my chest and twisted it. It was a Tuesday, late afternoon. The kind of Ohio winter day where the sky looks like a giant slab of gray concrete pressing down on everything. I had just come home from my shift at the coffee shop, still smelling faintly of espresso and burnt milk. My hands were cold from the walk, but my heart was racing in a way I hadn't felt in years. I had news. Big news. Earlier that morning, during my 15-minute break, I had opened my email on my cracked phone screen, not really expecting anything. I was half thinking about the foam art I'd just messed up on some guy's latte when I saw the subject line. Congratulations, you've been accepted. I froze right there between the espresso machine and the pastry case, my knees going a little weak. It was from the Edison Fellowship for Emerging Artists, a program in New York I'd applied to months ago, fully expecting to be rejected. They only chose 12 artists nationwide each year. I told no one I'd applied, not even my friends. Definitely not my family. The email said they loved my portfolio, that my work showed emotional depth and originality, and that they wanted me in their next cohort. It felt like someone had just handed me a golden ticket. For years, I'd dreamed of living in New York, painting in a real studio, being surrounded by people who took art seriously. But life in Dayton had a way of pressing you down, making you forget those kinds of dreams. Rent, bills, the kind of jobs that paid just enough to keep you from starving but never enough to escape, those became the reality. Until that email. So, when I walked into our little two-bedroom apartment that afternoon, my fingers were practically tingling with excitement. I could hear my mom in the kitchen, rinsing dishes. The smell of fried onions and the faint crackle of the news station on the radio filled the air. She glanced up when I walked in, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, wearing her old faded blue sweatshirt. "You're home early," she said, her voice flat but not unkind. I have something to tell you," I said, setting my bag down. She didn't look up again, just kept scrubbing at a pan. "What's that?" I took a breath, trying to keep my voice steady. I got accepted into an art fellowship. In New York. The Edison Fellowship, it's huge, Mom. They only take 12 people a year. I'm one of them. I waited. I thought she'd stop what she was doing, maybe turn around, maybe even smile. Instead, she kept her hands in the soapy water, and after a long pause, she said, "Stop pretending you're special. You're not going anywhere." At first, I thought I'd misheard.
"What?"
I asked, my voice small. She turned then, finally meeting my eyes. "Hannah, you can't just run off to New York like you're some kind of genius. You'll waste money you don't have, end up back here in 6 months, and what then? You need to be realistic. This isn't a fairy tale." The words hit me so hard I actually took a step back. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. My mom had never been the warm, overly encouraging type, but I thought, at least for something like this, she'd be proud. "It's not pretending," I finally managed to say. "I got in."
"They want me."
She shook her head like I was a little kid insisting the tooth fairy was real. "They want your money. Those programs always do. You think some fancy art people in New York care about you? You're just another face to them." I could feel heat rising in my chest, that tight, hot pressure behind my eyes. "This isn't some scam, Mom. It's real. It's an opportunity. Do you know how hard it is to get in?" Her voice stayed calm, almost bored. "Do you know how hard it is to survive in New York? You've never even been there. You think you're going to waltz in and make it just because some email said you're original? The world doesn't work like that." She turned back to the sink. Conversation over, as far as she was concerned. I stood there, gripping the strap of my bag, so tightly my knuckles turned white. I wanted to yell. I wanted to cry. I wanted to throw the stupid wet pan she was scrubbing across the room. Instead, I just said, "Thanks for believing in me." My voice cracked on the word believing. I went to my room, shut the door, and sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the email on my phone again. The words, "Congratulations, you've been accepted," blurred as my eyes filled with tears. It should have been one of the happiest moments of my life. Instead, It felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Here's the thing about hearing something like that from someone you love. It doesn't just hurt in the moment. It plants a seed. A poisonous one. And even though I told myself I wasn't going to let her get to me, the seed had already started to grow. Was she right? Was I just pretending to be special? Was I about to blow up my life chasing something impossible? But beneath the fear and the doubt, there was something else. Something hot and sharp. Anger. I didn't know it then, but that anger would end up being the fuel I needed. Her words didn't kill my dream. They set it on fire. That was the night I made the decision. I was going to New York whether she approved or not. Even if it meant leaving with nothing but my paintings, a suitcase, and the stubborn belief that I was worth more than she thought. The morning after my mom told me I wasn't special, I woke up with that sentence still echoing in my head. I lay there staring at the water stains on my ceiling, replaying her tone, calm, certain, final. I knew if I stayed in that apartment one more year, I'd drown in that kind of thinking. The longer I let her voice be the loudest one in my life, the smaller I would get. I didn't have a savings account worth mentioning, just $228 in checking and a handful of coins in a mason jar on my desk. Rent ate most of my paycheck, and the coffee shop barely gave me enough hours to keep the lights on. But I had time, and I had grit. That night, after my shift, I sat down with a notebook and wrote at the top of the page in big block letters, "How to get to New York in 90 days. I didn't know why I chose 90 days. It just felt like enough time to make something happen without letting life get in the way. I made 3 columns. Money I have, depressingly short list. Money I can get, longer but a little scary. Things I can sell, this one got real fast. The first item I wrote under things I can sell was my car. A 2009 Honda Civic with a dent in the passenger door from where a shopping cart attacked me in the Kroger parking lot. I loved that car. It was freedom on 4 wheels. But the truth was, if I was going to New York, I wouldn't need it. The next morning, I listed it online. Within a week, it was gone, and I was holding $4,200 in cash. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt the weight of what I'd just done. No car meant relying on buses, rides from friends, and a lot of walking in the freezing cold. But every time I thought about quitting, I saw my mom's face, heard her voice saying, "Stop pretending you're special." That was enough to lace up my boots and keep moving. I picked up a second job waitressing at a diner across town. Mornings at the coffee shop, evenings at the diner. I learned quickly that diner shifts were a different kind of exhaustion. The smell of fried food clung to my clothes, my hair, even my skin. By the end of each shift, my feet throbbed so badly I could barely stand in the shower. But tips were tips, and every crumpled dollar went straight into an envelope under my mattress labeled NYC. Still, the money was coming in too slowly. So I started taking side gigs, anything that paid. Babysitting for neighbors. Painting murals in people's basements for $50 and a pizza. Pet sitting. At one point, I walked 3 pit bulls at the same time for a woman who swore they were gentle. They were not. I still have a scar on my arm from that afternoon. The exhaustion was bone deep, but the idea of telling the fellowship, "I can't afford to come," terrified me more than working myself to the point of collapse. Meanwhile, my mom avoided the topic altogether. She didn't ask how the fellowship plans were going, didn't ask if I was saving money. It was like she thought if she ignored it long enough, the dream would just evaporate. But every time she gave me that look, half pity, half annoyance, I doubled down. I'd smile and say things like, "Just wait, Mom.
You'll see."
She'd shake her head, and I could almost hear her thinking, "No, I won't." One night, about a month in, I was at the diner wiping down tables when an older man asked me what I wanted to do with my life. I don't even remember what led to the question. I told him about the fellowship, about New York, about how I was working every hour I could to make it happen. He didn't say much, just nodded. When he paid his bill, he left a $100 bill under the plate. On the back of the receipt, he'd written, "Don't let anyone tell you you're not special." I went into the break room and cried like a little kid. Not because of the money, though God knows I needed it, but because it was the first time in weeks that someone had said the opposite of what my mom said. That night, I went home, counted my money, and realized I was just over halfway to what I thought I'd need for my first 3 months in the city.
Halfway.
Halfway to proving her wrong. By the time spring rolled around, my body was running on caffeine and stubbornness. I'd lost weight from skipping meals to save money, my hands were raw from constant work, and my eyes were permanently ringed with dark circles. But I had $7,600 saved. It wasn't enough for comfort, but it was enough for a fighting chance. I bought a one-way bus ticket to New York. When my mom saw it sticking out of my bag one morning, she just shook her head and said, "Don't come running back when this blows up in your face." I didn't answer, because deep down I knew if I made it there, I wasn't coming back at all. The day I arrived in New York felt like stepping into a different planet, louder, faster, and more alive than anywhere I'd ever been. I got off the Greyhound at Port Authority with 2 suitcases, a portfolio tube, and $412 left in my checking account. I could feel the city's energy pressing in from all sides, horns blaring, people shouting into their phones, the smell of hot pretzels mixing with car exhaust. My sublet was in a 4th-floor walk-up in Bushwick. The listing had promised character, which turned out to mean peeling paint, a questionable smell in the hallway, and a family of cockroaches who seemed deeply invested in my arrival. But the rent was just low enough to be survivable, and the window in my room faced a brick wall that somehow felt less oppressive than the one I'd left behind in Ohio. The fellowship started the following Monday, and it was immediately clear I was not in Dayton anymore. The other artists were intimidating, sculptors who'd been featured in magazines, painters who had degrees from schools I'd only ever read about, photographers who casually mentioned traveling to Iceland for light studies. They talked about art the way surgeons talk about anatomy, precise, confident, certain they belonged in the room. I kept my head down at first, afraid that if I opened my mouth, they'd realize I'd slipped in by mistake. The program was brutal. Every week, we presented new work for critique, and no one held back. The first time I showed my paintings, a fellow participant told me my style felt sentimental, like something you'd see in a suburban waiting room. That night, I went back to my apartment and stared at the canvas, wondering if my mom had been right all along. But then came the project that changed everything. One of our assignments was to create a piece inspired by a personal turning point. Without overthinking it, I painted the scene for my kitchen in Ohio. The moment my mom told me to stop pretending, I was special. I didn't soften it. I didn't make it symbolic or abstract. I painted it exactly as I remembered. The chipped mug by the sink, the yellow dish gloves on her hands, the way her mouth was half open mid-sentence, and my own face reflected faintly in the kitchen window. When I presented it, I expected the same polite dismissal I'd been getting for weeks. Instead, the room went quiet. One of the mentors, a gallery owner named Marisol Vega, leaned forward and said, "This is raw. It's uncomfortable. And it's real. Don't lose that." 2 weeks later, Marisol emailed me to say a visiting collector wanted to buy the piece. For more money than I'd made in the past year combined. I almost dropped my phone. The day after the sale went through, my mom called me. It had been months since we'd spoken, and my first thought was that maybe she'd heard the news and wanted to say she was proud of me. I answered, breathless. "Hey, Mom." Her voice was the same as always, calm, measured. "I saw your painting online," she said. My heart swelled. "Yeah? What did you think?" There was a pause. Then she said, "People think it's powerful, but I know it's just a phase. Don't let this get to your head." I felt my stomach drop. "A phase," I said, my voice rising despite myself. "You've had phases before, Hannah. Remember photography? Remember guitar? I just don't want you thinking one painting means you've made it. The world doesn't work like that." The same cold, heavy feeling I'd had in that kitchen months ago crept back in, but this time, something was different. I realized I didn't need her to believe in me. Not anymore. When we hung up, I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just sat there in my tiny apartment, the noise of the city filtering through the window, and felt a strange sense of calm. Her words didn't hurt the way they used to. They built a wall between us, sure, but maybe I needed that wall. Because on the other side of it was my life, finally taking shape. A year after arriving in New York, I stood in the middle of the Marisol Vega Gallery, staring at my name printed in bold letters on the wall. Hannah Pierce, Kitchen Lights. My first solo exhibition. The space was warm with a hum of voices, the air faintly scented with wine and fresh flowers. People milled about with champagne flutes in hand, leaning in close to study the paintings, my paintings. Some of them recognized me and smiled. Others nodded in approval, or whispered to their friends while pointing at the canvas. It was surreal. Just a year earlier, I'd been wiping down diner tables, my hands aching, wondering if I was about to ruin my life chasing a dream my mom swore was a fantasy. Now I was here, surrounded by people who took my work seriously, collectors, critics, fellow artists, people who didn't just see me as special in some vague, indulgent way. They saw me as worth investing in. Marisol walked up beside me, her heels clicking softly against the polished concrete floor. "You did it," she said, smiling. I shook my head. "We did it. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself." She tilted her head. "No, Hannah. You believed in yourself when someone else didn't. That's the difference." Her words landed hard because I knew exactly who she meant. One of the paintings that drew the most attention that night was Kitchen Lights, the same piece that had sold to the collector months earlier, but I'd been allowed to display it again for the show. People lingered in front of it, drawn to the tension in the scene. It was strange watching strangers study the moment that had nearly broken me. They didn't know the full story. They didn't hear the exact tone of my mother's voice, didn't feel the way my stomach had dropped when she told me I wasn't special. But somehow, they felt it in the brushstrokes. And that, I realized, was what made art powerful. It could carry my private pain into the public world, where it stopped being just mine. Halfway through the evening, I stepped outside for some air. The spring breeze felt soft on my skin, and the city's night sounds swirled around me. Laughter, traffic, the distant rumble of the subway. I pulled out my phone and stared at it for a moment, wondering if I should call my mom. Part of me wanted to tell her everything. How people were connecting with my work, how my name was on the wall of a New York gallery, how I'd proven her wrong. But another part of me, the part that had grown stronger over the past year, knew she didn't need to hear it. This wasn't about proving her wrong anymore. It was about proving me right. When I went back inside, the room seemed even brighter. A young woman I didn't know came up to me and said, "Your work, it's like you painted my own life. Thank you for putting it into the world." Her eyes were glossy, and I felt my throat tighten. That's when I understood. I had already done the thing my mom said I couldn't. Not because I'd sold paintings or had my name in lights, but because my work had reached someone, really reached them. That was success. As the night wound down, I gave a short speech. I thanked the fellowship, Marisol, the friends who'd let me crash on their couches, the strangers who tipped me extra at the diner when I was barely holding it together. And then I added, lastly, I want to thank the people who doubted me. Sometimes doubt is the best fuel. It forces you to keep going just to see how far you can get. I didn't say my mother's name, but I knew she'd hear about it eventually. Walking home that night, the city buzzing around me, I realized something I wish I'd known sooner. She didn't have to believe in me. She just had to underestimate me enough to make me fight harder. Her voice told me I was nothing. My life proved her wrong.